this video we will learn how to draw 3D polygons or polyhedrons, and we're just going to stick with the rectangular prism and the tetrahedron or the pyramid structure. We're going to draw it two different ways. We're going to draw it using the perspective grid. We're going to be aided by the perspective grid. We're not going to use it for the whole time drawing each structure. And then on the second time, we're not going to use a perspective grid at all. Some notes with deciding whether you want to use perspective grid or a non-perspective grid is once you start drawing in perspective grid, then all your objects after that really need to be drawn in the same perspective grid. So for instance, like we have this pyramid here, and I have this rectangle here drawn it's in the same perspective grid, but it's drawn in the specific position of that perspective grid. So if I were to set it right here, it looks okay. Looks like it's the proper proportions. However, if I were to set this up here, your eye would immediately detect that something looks strange about this rectangular prism up here. It just doesn't look quite right. It doesn't look like it's matching up with the pyramid, and your eye will immediately notice that. So when you draw a perspective grid, you really have to keep the perspective grid that you drew it in mind whenever you draw things. However, if you draw without using perspective grid like this, and this rectangular prism here, you can set this anywhere you want and it will look fine when right alongside the other object that you drew without using perspective grid. That doesn't mean I'm not advocating for one or the other. I'm just showing you just what you need to keep in mind when you're drawing these things. We're going to delete all these and draw them from scratch. The first thing we're going to do is to draw the pyramid. Okay, so first thing, and we're going to use the perspective grid in the beginning. So we're going to click on this little perspective grid tool. If you don't see it along here, go up to Window, go down to Toolbars, and click on Advanced, and it should show up. Some other things that we're going to be using is the Appearance tool. So go up to Window, click on Appearance, and then drag it over and drop it in this side menu. Okay, so let's click on the perspective grid tool. So what you see is a perspective grid that shows up, and this is a 2-point perspective, and that's all we're going to work in today, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on the perspective grid, but you can see there's 2 vanishing points, one here, one there, and you kind of meet up in the front here. And we're going to draw 2 pyramids, but first we're just going to start with one. Let's go to the rectangle tool. So right now I have like a polyhedron kind of shown up here, but I want to click and hold on this. You probably see a rectangle, so click on that. And we want to define which side we want to draw on. So if we draw on this, it's going to be on the blue side. See how it's color coded right here? We would draw on this side. We don't want to draw on that side. If you click on here, we're going to draw on this side. Okay. If you click on the bottom, we will draw on the bottom side. Okay. Okay, so let's start with, we want to just draw on the bottom side. All we're doing is we're giving us some reference point. We're going to draw that bottom, the bottom square of the tetrahedron. So we click on the rectangle tool. I'm going to click, and then I'm going to hold the shift key, and I'm going to drag it out here. Okay, now we can use our selection tool, and if we do that, we notice that it loses its perspective. Okay, this is no longer on the same perspective. So we don't want to use the selection tool when manipulating these objects. Let's draw that rectangle again. And this time we're going to go down to that perspective tool, we're going to click and hold, and then use a perspective selection tool. Now when we move it, it stays in that perspective. Okay, so we're going to move it right into the front till it intersects with that line here. And that is all we're going to use the perspective tool for. So we're going to click and hold, click on this perspective grid tool again, then we're going to click this X. And that is the base of the tetrahedron. Now we want to create the triangle portions of the pyramid. So I'm going to click and hold on the I'm going to click on the polyhedron tool. That's down here. And I'm going to click and drag, and right now I have it on a triangle. You can move the up and down arrows because you probably have a pentagon, and you're just going to move it down, click the down arrow while holding on to the left mouse button. Click it all the way down till you see a triangle. Hold the shift key to keep the base level, although I guess that's not really all that important here. Okay, so now you have the triangle. I'm going to change this to let's change it to a little lighter color, just so it's different from the base. And I'm going to click on the direct selection tool. Click again on this object, just to see me doing it. I'm going to click, and I want to make sure that I have this little rectangle solid and this little square indicator of this anchor not selected. Okay, what I mean by that is I want to click on this, just manipulate that one anchor. So keep working with it until you only manipulate that one anchor. Bring it down to this base. Bring this one down to this base. And then I want to click this, and I want to be perfectly aligned with that center. If you remember, we placed this base rectangle on the perspective grid right in the center front. So when you're looking at this pyramid, you're going to be looking right down this line of the pyramid. You can draw the height any height you want. It doesn't matter. It just depends on how steep you want your pyramid to be. But it needs to be locked in with this point here, and it needs to be exactly vertical. That's pretty important. Okay, now I'm going to create the other face of the rectangle, and I'm going to make this just a little darker just to give it some, just so you can see it's different. Now you can reflect this, and it would be fine. It would actually match up. Let's right click, transform, reflect along the vertical line. Click OK, and you'll see that it matches up. You could have also just changed the anchor point so that they matched up. That would have been fine too. Okay, there's the pyramid. Now if you want it to have a little bit of a transparent appearance, highlight these two top ones. Go up to Appearance, Opacity, and we're just going to click 80. You can play around with whatever opacity level that you want. Okay, and there's a kind of a pyramid as you're looking down the line. Now next we want to draw a pyramid where we're not quite looking, our vantage point is not at the corner of this pyramid. Okay, we want to try it. We want to draw that. And again, this is all in perspective grid, so just keep that in mind. So I'm going to click that again. Now the perspective grid comes along, but this time we're going to draw a rectangle or a square in perspective on the base, but we're going to draw it offset here. So I'm going to click and hold, click on the rectangle tool, hold the shift key, and we're going to draw it right over here. Wherever you want to draw it is fine. Again, if you don't like the position, you can click and hold, click the perspective grid tool, the perspective selection tool, and move it around accordingly. But this is fine. So I'm going to click on the perspective grid tool, cancel out of the perspective grid with the X. Sometimes it's really challenging to get that little bitty X. There, okay. And there is that tool. There's the base, sorry. Now drawing it off the center is just a little more complicated. What we want is, whenever I draw the triangle, let me start by drawing the triangle. Okay. We're going to make this a little darker. Okay. Now I'm gonna join the points here. going to click on this one, turn this on the bottom. So what we want to know is where to put this. Okay, Control Z. So we've aligned the two bases. We want to click, and we want to know where to put this point here. We need that vertical line. Notice that on this this pyramid, the vertical line was right in the center. That was really easy. It's not going to be in the center in this case because we're looking at it off to the side. What we need is to create a line right in the middle of this point and this point. Okay. So I'm going to create a rectangle. And see that little point right there? That's where you need to draw the line. So we're going to zoom in. As long as we're close, it will be fine. Okay. So that is our vertical line that we're going to be meeting up with. So again, I want it to be exactly in the center of this point and this point. Okay, click again to make sure I'm only on this point. So as long as I'm along that line, this pyramid will look just fine. So let's put it right here. And now in last case, I could use the reflection tool to take this object and turn it into this other side. But I won't be able to do that here. So I'm just going to copy. I'm going to move these vertices or these anchor points accordingly. There. Now I want to change this to maybe a lighter color. Change this to an even lighter color. Or something a little darker than this one. That's just to give it some shading. So we're assuming that the light is up here, and so it's going to cast some shade along the backside. Now let's make this a little transparent. I selected both those objects, clicked opacity. Let's do 80 again. It seemed to work last time. And there you go. Now you can create a triangle for this side, the back triangle here and the back right triangle here. Probably not necessary because that color isn't going to shine through anyways. I would just draw a line. And I'm going to right click, arrange, send to back. And there you go. So that's the pyramid. And this again is using the perspective tool. Okay. Now let's do a rectangular prism. We're going to go back to the perspective grid tool, and let's just draw a rectangle. I'm going to start back here, and put it like that. Okay. And then we're going to do the left side. So we're going to click on the left side, start at the bottom base, go up to here. And then we're going to do the orange side, the right side. So I'm going to click over here. Now, rectangles are really easy to draw in the perspective grid tool. When you start getting into these more angular polyhedrons, then you have to do what we did and kind of get away from the perspective grid and kind of draw the other things manually. Okay, so I drew the front rectangle. Now I'm drawing the back rectangle. Now we're going to click on this because we're going to create this rectangle, but we're going to do it back here. So you have to be on the blue side. So what the 3D perspective tool does is it doesn't create, in reality, 3D objects. It just warps those objects so that they look 3D. Creating 3D objects is a lot more complicated, and you need a whole other program that's specifically designed to do that. So now we're going to do the top. So we have to click this little base because we're going to do a 2D object, but we're going to do it a little higher. So I'm going to click up here. Draw it up here. Again, rectangles are super easy in the perspective grid tool. Okay. And then we're just going to click on the perspective grid and click X. Because we've already drawn the object. And now we can color it accordingly. We can make this a very light color. Selected this object, so we're going to do darker color. So, come on, give me that object. this one, so we're going to do a, I don't know, kind of a midway between those two objects. This, something like that. Now you say, well, I drew this one in the back. Why does it? Okay, well, it drew it in the back, so that's really good. So I thought I actually was going to draw it in front, but it drew it in the back, so that's good. Okay, because this line is under this solid fill here. So let's we can make this. Something like that, I guess. Okay. Now this one is drawn in the back, like I was referring to. This one's drawn on top because it was one of the last ones I was drawn. This one's drawn in the back because it was one of the first rectangles we drew. We drew the bottom rectangle and then we drew this one. So we want this to be in the back, or we want this to be in the front. So we're going to transform. Actually, when we bring this aside, this bottom base is in the front. We can change the color, and then this time we're going to right click, arrange, send to back. We're going to click on this one, right click, arrange, send to front. This one, see how it's in the back there? We're going to right click, arrange, bring to front. Because remember, this was like this was the first rectangle we drew, then this was the second rectangle that we drew. Okay, so the perspective grid, remember, it's not drawing 3D objects. It's drawing new objects with the perspective grid in mind. So it doesn't know to draw it behind the last object because it doesn't have a 3D space that it's thinking about. It just makes it look 3D. So we're going to click on this one, and this one. And we're going to click opacity, make it 80%. You don't have to make it, give it an opacity, but if you wanted to, you can. And there you go. So that is using the perspective grid tool. Now, if you don't want to use the perspective grid tool, then you can because keep in mind, again, if I were to position this up here, it would look awful strange. But you don't have to use a perspective grid tool. You can just create, like if we want to create this this pyramid, you can let's create just a rectangle. Or actually, the easiest thing, let's draw a cube that looks like that looks in 3D. So I want to just make this a cube. Doesn't have to be a cube, but just for right now. Now I'm gonna click on this one side here. Okay. Use the direct selection tool. Come on. Okay, it's not letting me. So let me click on that top anchor, hold shift, click on the bottom anchor. I'm gonna drag it down. We're going to hold the shift key because I only want to go along the vertical direction, and we're going to go about like that. So that's going to be the left hand side. Again, notice I didn't use the perspective grid, I'm just drawing it by hand. Now I'm going to copy this. Now I'm in the center, so I know this is going to be just a reflection. So I'm going to transform, reflect, click OK, drag that down. Okay. And then I want to draw the top rectangle, and to do that is we're going to draw another rectangle here. Let's draw it a little different color. Move this along here. Okay, I'm going to move this all the way up here. So the bottom is going to be right here. The top is going to meet right up with that vertex, that joint between the two, and there. So that's without a perspective grid. So actually, it looks a little high. Oh, that's because I didn't draw this all the way down. So it's actually going to be a little squished. So one way of doing that is, let's just get that angle here and reflect it. Draw that line. I'm going to right click, transform, reflect. I'm going to do it along the horizontal. Okay. That's really the angle that we should be using. Okay. Let's move this away so we can delete that line so it doesn't bug us in the future. There, that looks right. And there, that's not using a perspective grid at all. Okay, there's no vanishing points here. There's no perspective on this. It's just a 3D cube. Okay, what's different about this and some of these other objects? Well, let's take a look. I'm going to copy this, delete. Now look at the base. Now this base, remember we drew this as a square, so we would just extend this up to draw a cube. Okay, but look at the difference between this base and this. This is a perfect diamond right here. This is not a perfect diamond. This part up here is a little squished. This is a little elongated, this point, and that's because as you go into the background, objects that are the same size appear smaller. So this line here, if we push it towards backwards in space, that line is going to get smaller, and so that's why it's shown this way. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind, that when you draw in perspective, it's warping that object, so it's not going to look quite the same. Okay, now to draw a pyramid, it's pretty easy. I'm just going to copy over that diamond, and I'm going to use the polygon tool, and again I can move it down till I see a triangle. Let's give it just a little bit different so that we can see the difference. And a lot of the same principles that I used to draw that tetrahedron is going to be applied in this case. So I'm going to bring it up here, make sure it's aligned in the center. Okay, I can reflect, transform, reflect along the vertical. So I'm just going to flip it along the vertical line. Make this a little darker. Along. Okay. Give it a little bit of opacity. You don't have to, but just to give it more of that 3D appearance. Okay. Now the difference here is I can put this anywhere that I want, and it looks like it belongs in this picture. Can't take this one and put it here. Notice that now that I put it among these objects, this looks kind of extended up at top, even though it's not. So just keep that in mind. That's how you draw some polyhedrons in Adobe Illustrator. It doesn't really have a 3D modeling program. It has some 3D effects, like if you go up to Window, or I'm sorry, if you go to Effect, you have some 3D effects, but all it does is it takes, and really everything that Illustrator does in the 3D mode just takes a 2D object and expands it along a dimension. So you can rotate it along an axis, you can extrude it, kind of turn it into a solid object. But you're just taking that 2D object and you're extruding it along a dimension, or you can revolve it around an axis to make a volume, and I'll have another video sometime in the future showing all of those. But it just takes a 2D object and it expands it in another dimension. You can't really manipulate that 3D object and make all sorts of intricate things, like polyhedrons and that sort of thing, because Adobe Illustrator is really not designed to do that sort of thing. But that's how you make objects that look. Here's how you make objects that look like they're 3D and they're these geometric shapes.